You? At the year-end party? Sarah, please. It's a family event, not charity. Ethan's voice sliced through the chatter, smooth and cold, like he'd been waiting for the moment. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, it was soft, polite, the kind that hurts more because it sounds civilized. My fork hovered above my plate, the roasted chicken already cold, and I felt every eye at the table glance my way before turning back to their wine. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the flickering candle in the center of the table, the wax melting down one side, slow and silent. I'd learned long ago that silence was safer than reaction. But that night, it felt different. He'd said it too easily, too proudly, like reminding me of my place gave him warmth. My name is Sarah Upton. I'm 36, a freelance designer from Denver, though in my family that might as well mean unemployed. They don't see what I build, they only count what shines. Ethan works in finance, wears suits with his initials on the cuff, and still talks to me like I never left the porch light on when he came home late from college. Mother smiled at him, her lipstick catching the light. He's right, dear. You don't enjoy those things anyway. Too loud for your taste. Too loud. Too loud for the woman who once stayed up nights sewing his first suit by hand. I wanted to ask her if she remembered, but I swallowed the thought. No one at that table remembered the quiet parts, the years I carried more than my share while they praised his ambition. Vanessa, his fiancée, added, "Oh, Sarah, you'd be bored. It's going to be so elegant. Black tie only, you know how these corporate people are." I smiled, soft and steady. "Yes, I know exactly how they are." The room hummed again. Glasses clinked. Conversation returned to safer topics. His promotion, her dress, their trip to Aspen. I became invisible again, the empty seat filled only by what I didn't say. But invisibility has a sound. It's the quiet echo that follows every word not meant for you. Ethan leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You understand, right, Sarah? We just don't want you feeling out of place." I met his eyes. I never do. He looked away first. That's how it always went. He threw the match, but never stayed to watch it burn. Mother cut a piece of steak, her tone casual. "It's good you're keeping busy, though. Your little art projects must be fulfilling." I nodded. They are. She meant my design clients, the few who paid late but believed in my work. To her, anything that didn't come with a plaque wasn't real. Inside, I could feel the familiar ache forming behind my ribs, that dull, patient kind that comes from years of being politely dismissed. It's strange how quiet cruelty ages you faster than loud anger. It wears your posture down until even breathing feels like an act of defiance. Ethan's phone buzzed. He picked it up mid-sentence, laughing, as he read a message. "Sorry, Mom, Vanessa just got confirmation about the catering for the party. Everything's perfect. It's going to be a real Upton celebration." A real Upton celebration. Meaning, without me? I cut into my food, pretending not to notice the taste had gone. The gravy was cold, the texture thick. My hands stayed steady, but my mind ran in circles, tracing every moment that led me here. The sacrifices no one mentioned, the small favors I'd done that became his foundation. When I was 22, I'd taken my father's old savings to help Ethan through his first internship. He'd promised to pay it back when things settled. They never did. He became the golden son. I became the sister who liked to stay small. Vanessa leaned across the table. "Maybe you could help me with the decorations, though. You're creative, right?" The way she said creative felt like a hobby, not a skill. I smiled again. "No, I think you've got it handled." Her eyes flashed just a little surprise before turning back to her glass. I stayed quiet after that, my focus drifting between their voices and the dim reflection of myself in the wine bottle beside my plate. I looked tired, older somehow, though I'd put on mascara to hide it. The evening crawled forward. The talk turned to flights, hotels, guest lists, all things that had nothing to do with me. I listened because that's what I'd always done. Listen, nod, endure. But the weight of their laughter pressed harder than usual. It wasn't jealousy I felt. It was clarity. I realized in that moment they weren't trying to hurt me. They just didn't think of me at all. That was the sharper wound. Indifference is colder than hate. I excused myself before dessert. Mother waved her hand absently. Drive safe, dear. Outside, the air bit against my skin. The winter wind moved through the trees, whispering across the driveway. I sat in my car for a minute before turning the key, staring at the lights of their house flickering through the curtains. Inside, they were probably laughing again. Maybe replaying Ethan's line, maybe not. It shouldn't have mattered anymore. But it did, because I'd given them years of my loyalty, my help, my quiet, and in return, they gave me absence. On the drive home, the silence in the car was heavier than the noise at that table. I could hear my heart beating against the steering wheel, steady and calm, but different, like something small had shifted. I didn't cry. I don't do that anymore. I just kept driving through the frozen streets until the city lights began to thin. I thought about every time I'd accepted their distance, every smile I'd forced, every dinner where I'd pretended not to notice being excluded. That night, as I set my keys down on the counter, I caught my reflection again in the kitchen window. The woman staring back didn't look weak. She looked done. I whispered to the empty room, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong there. But the words didn't sting the way they used to. They just sounded final. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the small table by the window, and listened to the city hum below. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like space. Space to think, space to decide. If you've ever been the quiet one in a loud room, stay with me, because what came next still feels like justice. That night, I decided silence wasn't the same as peace. When I was a child, I used to think love was a sound. My mother's laugh when Ethan showed her a report card, the way her voice softened when she said his name, the way she looked up when he entered the room. I waited years to hear that same warmth directed at me. It never came. I remember one morning after Dad's funeral. I was 15, and Ethan was 11. The house felt hollow. The air smelled like coffee gone bitter. Mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking around her cup. I'd already packed Ethan's lunch, ironed his shirt, and tied his shoes. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to thank me. She looked at him and said, "You're the man now, Ethan. Make your father proud." I stood there, quiet, holding the sandwich I'd made for him. I wanted her to look at me, to say something, anything. Instead, she reached out, touched his cheek, and smiled. That was the day I understood that my place in this family would always be behind someone else's shadow. Years passed, and that pattern never changed. Every small success Ethan had was treated like a miracle. Every effort I made was either expected or corrected. When I told her I wanted to study design, she laughed gently and said, "That's a nice hobby, dear, but don't you want something stable?" I took a job at a small studio while Ethan chased finance. I worked late nights, learned software I couldn't afford, took freelance gigs to pay for his textbooks when he fell short. He'd thank me sometimes, but it was always casual, like saying pass the salt. Gratitude to him was a currency he used sparingly. Mother would beam when his letters came from college. "Your brother's doing so well," she'd say, reading every line out loud while my own work samples sat unopened on the counter. One afternoon, I mailed her a flyer for my first gallery project, a window display downtown. She called me that night. "Oh, Sarah, it's lovely. But you know Ethan's company is expanding already? Isn't that exciting?" I said yes, even though it wasn't. I don't think she ever meant to be cruel. Some people love unevenly without realizing it. But every compliment aimed at him felt like a reminder that I was the spare, the steady one, the background noise in a house tuned to his frequency. The day he bought his first car, Mother made a roast and invited the neighbors. The day I paid off my student loans, she asked me to pick up her dry cleaning. Once I tried to tell her how that felt. It was a few years ago, after dinner, when Ethan had gone home early. She was washing dishes. I said quietly, "You've always been proud of him. Have you ever been proud of me?" She paused, hands still in the water. "Of course I have. You're responsible. You keep things going." It sounded like praise, but it wasn't. Responsibility is just another word for invisible. I dried my hands and changed the subject. Even now, when I think back to those years, I can still hear the echo of her voice carrying his name. Ethan, 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 always rolling off her tongue like music. When he became successful, it wasn't pride that stung me. It was erasure. He started hosting dinners, introducing himself as self-made, forgetting the years I held everything together. Once at one of those dinners, someone asked him who inspired him most. He smiled and said, "My father, of course." I looked down at my glass, the wine trembling slightly in my hand. Mother clapped for him, her eyes shining. I sat right beside her, and she didn't notice the silence I kept swallowing. Sometimes I tell myself he doesn't remember those years, because remembering would mean guilt. But deep down, I know he does. He just learned that forgetting me makes his story cleaner. I still visit Mother once a week. She's older now, her memory softer around the edges. Every time I walk in, she asks if I've heard from Ethan. When I say no, she sighs like it's my fault. "You two were so close once," she says. I was never close. I was available. There's a difference. Last Sunday, I brought her groceries. She looked through the bags and smiled faintly. "You always bring too much," she said. Then she added almost kindly, "You should find someone, Sarah. You spend too much time alone." I wanted to laugh. She'd spent a lifetime teaching me solitude. Now she treated it like an illness. On the way home, I drove past Ethan's new office downtown. His name gleamed in silver above the glass doors. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching people walk in and out. None of them would know he once lived in a house where I folded his shirts and signed his homework so Mother could rest. I thought about knocking on that glass, reminding him who I was. But I didn't. There was no point. Some people only see you when they need your reflection. That night, I lay awake listening to the clock tick, and for the first time, I let myself stop waiting for her approval. It wasn't anger that came, it was release. Love, I realized, wasn't always loud. It was sometimes just unseen. When I walked into my mother's living room that afternoon, the smell of lemon polish and old flowers hit me before her voice did. She was humming to herself, rearranging the framed photos that lined the wall beside the piano. Every year she added a new one, each frame carefully chosen, perfectly dusted, displayed like proof of a family that had always been proud of itself. I stood there for a moment, pretending to look at them the way a stranger would. Ethan in his graduation robe, Ethan at his first job, Ethan and Vanessa on a beach holding hands, even one of Mom and her bridge club, all of them smiling in coordinated pastels. But mine wasn't there. I scanned the wall again, my heart tightening. Then I saw it, half hidden behind the lamp on the side table. My photo, the one from my first design showcase. The frame's glass was cracked through the center, a pale line running straight across my smile. I reached out and lifted it carefully. "When did this happen?" Mother turned, squinting as if she couldn't quite remember. "Oh, that. It must have fallen last month when Ethan was helping me dust. I meant to get a new frame, but, well, you know how things pile up." The way she said it sounded harmless, but it wasn't. The wall behind her sparkled with perfect symmetry. Nothing there was broken. I held the picture in my hands, the fracture cutting my face in two. "You could have called me. I'd have fixed it for you." She smiled faintly, turning back toward the piano. "You're busy, dear. Besides, it's just a photo." Just a photo. Vanessa appeared from the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She carried a tray of tea and those almond cookies she always brought over, the ones Mother pretended to like. "Oh, I see you found it," she said, glancing at the cracked frame. "Maybe it's for the best, Sarah. You're not photogenic for public events." The words floated out so smoothly, as if she'd rehearsed them. She smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. I set the photo down on the table beside me. Good thing truth doesn't need an audience. Her smile faltered for just a second, then returned. Of course, she said softly, as if she'd been misunderstood. Mother laughed lightly, waving her hand. Oh, you girls, always teasing each other. No one was teasing. But I didn't correct her. I'd stopped doing that years ago. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the cracked photo still visible out of the corner of my eye. The silence stretched between us. Mother poured tea for everyone, the sound of the liquid filling the cups too loud in the quiet room. Ethan wasn't there, but his presence filled every inch of that house. His framed smiles, his voice on her voicemail, his stories waiting in her conversations. Even when he was gone, he wasn't absent. And even when I was there, I wasn't seen. Mother handed me a cup. You should come by more often, Sarah. Vanessa and Ethan are so good about visiting. I nodded. I've been busy with clients. Oh, that's nice, she said, her tone polite but distracted. Ethan says you're doing that little design work. It must be nice to have something to keep you occupied. Something to keep me occupied. Like a child given crayons to pass the time. I looked at her, wanting to ask if she remembered how many nights I stayed home so she could rest after Dad died, or how many meals I cooked for Ethan when she was too tired to get out of bed. But the words stayed inside. She wouldn't hear them anyway. Vanessa set her cup down gently. We're finalizing the guest list for the year-end party. You'll let us know if you're free, right? I met her eyes. I wasn't aware I was invited. She tilted her head, pretending surprise. Oh, well, Ethan thought maybe you'd feel out of place. You know how formal these things are. Mother nodded. It's not really your scene, dear. You wouldn't enjoy it. I let the words settle. Then I smiled, calm and even. You're probably right. I wouldn't. Vanessa looked relieved, like she'd just checked something off her list. She reached for a cookie, glanced at my picture again, then turned back to the wall of Ethan's perfect frames. He's going to have that one blown up for the office, she said proudly. The one with him and the mayor. It'll look so professional. I swallowed the bitter taste of my tea. It suits him. The conversation moved on without me. I sat there listening to their soft laughter, the way Vanessa's voice blended with Mother's. My thoughts drifted to that cracked frame again, to how fragile glass really was, how easily something beautiful could break, and how quickly people decided it wasn't worth fixing. When I finally stood to leave, Mother hugged me lightly. Be sure to call before you come next time, she said. You never know when Ethan might drop by. I promised I would. Outside, the air felt sharp against my face. I took one last look through the window before walking to my car. They were both standing by the photo wall again, adjusting the angles of his frames under the soft yellow light. Mine remained hidden behind the lamp, forgotten, fractured, collecting dust. As I drove away, I thought about how easy it is for people to call something an accident when it's really a choice. Maybe the frame had fallen, or maybe someone had moved it aside because it didn't fit the picture they wanted the world to see. Either way, it stayed broken. I didn't know it yet, but that frame wasn't the only thing broken. The call came just after 8 in the morning. I was sketching layouts for a client, still half awake, coffee gone cold beside my laptop. When I saw my mother's name flash on the screen, I hesitated before answering. Calls from her never came without strings. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice light. She didn't bother with greetings. Sarah, honey, I hate to ask, but Ethan's in a bit of a bind. He's starting something new with his partners, and they're a little short on capital this month. I told him you'd help. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. You told him I'd help? Yes, she said quickly, as if saying it faster would make it reasonable. You've always been so good with money, and you have that design work, so I figured you'd have something set aside. I stared at the screen, listening to her voice wrap Ethan's name in warmth while mine hung bare in the cold. Mom, he just bought a new car. I'm still paying off my last project's expenses. She sighed. the kind that sounded disappointed, not empathetic. "You always think small, Sarah. This is an investment in family. He'll pay you back." I almost laughed. "Like he paid me back the first time?" She went quiet, and the silence between us felt like an old bruise being pressed. Years ago, when Ethan begged me to co-sign his first business loan, I'd said yes. I believed in him. He was my little brother, full of ideas and confidence, while I had only fear and practicality. He'd promised it was temporary, that once his company took off, I'd never regret helping. But things went wrong. He missed payments, disappeared into his new ventures, and when the bank called, they called me. I worked double shifts for almost a year to fix what he broke. Mother finally spoke again. "That was years ago. Don't hold it over him forever." "I'm not holding anything, Mom. I'm just done being the fallback." Her tone sharpened. "He's your brother. He's trying to build something important. Why can't you ever be supportive without keeping score?" Supportive? That word always meant bending until I snapped. I took a breath and forced calm into my voice. "I've supported him my whole life. Maybe it's his turn to stand on his own." She muttered something about ungratefulness, then hung up before I could respond. The line went dead, but her words lingered like a draft through a cracked window. I sat there, staring at the sketch on my screen. A storefront window, bright and modern, built to display something beautiful. But I felt small again, like I was 16, clutching a loan form I didn't understand, just trying to keep peace in a family that never saw me as anything but the helper. That afternoon, I went through my old files. I found the contract, the loan agreement Ethan had begged me to sign when he couldn't qualify a loan. My name still sat neatly beside his. The ink faded but clear, a small reminder that loyalty can become a leash if you don't learn when to let go. I remembered the night he brought me the papers. We were sitting at my kitchen table. "It's just paperwork, Sarah," he'd said, smiling that easy smile of his. "You trust me, right?" I had. And when it fell apart, he called it bad luck, as if numbers and signatures were acts of fate. By evening, I tried to push it out of my mind. I cooked dinner, washed the dishes, and told myself not to care. But care is a hard habit to break when your heart has been trained to rescue. Around 9, I heard the mail slot clatter. I picked up the stack of envelopes from the floor, flipping through the usual bills, advertisements, one envelope from a bank I didn't recognize right away. The logo tugged at a memory buried deep. I tore it open slowly. My eyes scanned the first line. Account reactivation notice. Outstanding balance due under co-signed agreement. The room went still. The words blurred, but I didn't need to read them twice. The old debt, the one I thought I'd buried years ago, was back, revived like a ghost refusing to stay in the ground. Ethan's name sat neatly above mine, but the responsibility circled back to me, always to me. I sank into the chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I'd cleaned up his past once, thinking it would end there. Now it was back to remind me that generosity without boundaries isn't kindness, it's surrender. I thought about calling him. I even typed his name into my phone. But then I stopped. What would I say? That I'd saved him again? That my life was still paying the price of his dreams? He wouldn't feel guilt. He'd feel relief. And my mother would call it proof that family always helps. I set the phone down. The light from the lamp stretched across the table, catching the corner of that cracked photo frame I'd brought home weeks ago. My reflection split down the middle. For the first time, I didn't look like the forgotten sister. I looked like someone who had finally understood the truth. Being needed isn't the same as being valued. And some debts, no matter how you pay them, never really clear. When I folded the letter back into the envelope, my hand stopped shaking. I placed it on the counter, beside the cold cup of coffee, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." The paper rustled softly in the quiet room, as if it already knew I meant it. The notification popped up while I was finishing a client call. A soft chime, a flash of blue light, and there it was, Vanessa's post. "Excited for our classy family-only year-end party. Can't wait to celebrate with those who matter most." The picture attached was of gold invitations, embossed lettering, champagne flutes glinting in the background. I didn't need to zoom in to know I hadn't received one. My inbox was empty. My name wasn't on that list, digital or otherwise. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. Classy, family only. Those two phrases together did more damage than they probably intended. They'd built a wall out of them, tall enough to keep me out and polite enough that no one could accuse them of cruelty. The call I'd been on ended with someone saying, "You still there, Sarah?" I said I was, though I wasn't sure that was true. By evening, my phone was buzzing with group messages. Cousins sharing the invite, distant relatives complimenting the event theme, old friends tagging Ethan and Vanessa with lines like, "Can't wait." Every ping was a reminder that even technology had learned how to exclude me gracefully. I opened my messages and scrolled to Nora's name. She was my only friend who had known me before the cracks formed, before Ethan's success turned me into the family's forgotten chapter. When I told her what had happened, she called right away. "You should go anyway," she said. "Your family. You have every right to be there." I laughed softly. "I'd rather not walk into a room that's already decided I don't belong." She sighed. "Sarah, you've let them push you out long enough. You can't let them keep doing this." I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking at the dim reflection of myself in the microwave door. It's not about letting them. It's about knowing when silence says more than presence. There was a pause on her end, the kind that comes when someone realizes you've already made up your mind. "Still," she said quietly, "it's cruel. You don't deserve that." "I know," I said, and I meant it this time. When we hung up, I scrolled back to Vanessa's post. Hundreds of likes, compliments about her taste, her elegance, her grace. Words that looked good on a screen, but hollow in truth. I clicked on her profile, and there I was, tagged in nothing, mentioned nowhere, replaced by captions about Ethan's success and her upcoming charity brunch. That's when it hit me. The invisibility I'd been feeling wasn't accidental. It was curated. They'd learned how to erase me politely, with smiles and champagne. I thought about the years I'd spent helping Ethan in silence, how I'd cleaned up his messes, co-signed his loans, stood by him at every milestone, even when he forgot to mention me. And now, in this digital age, they'd found new ways to remind me I didn't count. But humiliation has a strange effect on me. It doesn't make me smaller. It makes me sharper. I opened my email and searched through my archive until I found the last message Ethan had sent me, a forwarded contract from 2 years ago, asking for one small favor. I scrolled through it slowly, line by line, remembering how I'd stayed up that night helping him edit his pitch deck while he celebrated with friends. That night, I saw clearly. My silence had always been their permission. The post continued to gain traction. I watched as strangers praised them for their tight-knit family values. I closed the app before the bitterness could spill over. Instead, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, the city lights blinking below. My mind was quiet, but underneath it, something moved, something steady and deliberate. I imagined walking into that ballroom, dressed simply, calm as ever, watching their smiles stiffen. I imagined standing by the wall of photos and realizing my picture still wasn't there. And I imagined the exact moment when I'd stop waiting for an invitation and start creating my own stage. Nora texted again later that night. "You sure you're not going? I'll go with you if you want." I typed back slowly. "Not yet. Class isn't something you announce. It's something you prove." The words felt heavier than I expected, like they'd been sitting inside me for years waiting to be said aloud. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry either. I felt awake, like a window had finally opened in a room I'd forgotten to leave. I stared at the faint reflection of myself in the glass, the city lights flickering across my face. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from another apartment, a soft jazz tune, low and calm. It made me think of how life keeps moving, even when people try to stop you from being part of it. That was the night something inside me shifted. The night humiliation turned into purpose. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew it then. That was the night I decided to build something of my own. Would you have gone to that party uninvited? Or built your own instead? The morning after Vanessa's post, I woke up before the sun. My mind was restless, looping through words that had no weight: class, family, belonging. I made coffee and sat at my desk, the steam rising into the quiet. The bitterness tasted like focus. For hours, I stared at an empty page. Then an idea came, small at first, like a whisper that didn't know if it should speak. I opened a new file and typed 3 words: the Renewal Gala. It sounded fragile, uncertain, but it was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not Nora, not my mother, not even the small circle of clients who sometimes remembered to thank me. I'd learned something about silence. It can build stronger walls than anger ever could. So I worked in it, day after day, night after night. The idea was simple: a charity event for underprivileged artists, the kind of people who never got a seat at tables like Ethan's. I wanted to give them what I never had: recognition, dignity, a moment under real light. Maybe that was selfish. Maybe it was the only way I knew how to heal. I started with what I had: a list of contacts from old design jobs, a few friends from art school who'd gone their own way, and the studio space I rented downtown. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. The first week, I barely slept. I worked until my eyes blurred. I handled designs, sponsorship letters, and venue inquiries like someone possessed. My hands hurt, my head pounded, but I kept going. Pain became fuel. Every email I sent felt like a small act of defiance. Every call I made reminded me I wasn't as powerless as they thought. People started responding, some out of curiosity, others out of kindness. A local art dealer agreed to contribute. A small restaurant owner offered catering for free. The momentum grew quietly, like something sacred forming in secret. At night, when exhaustion finally caught me, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling. My body ached, but my mind refused to stop. I thought about Ethan's smile, Vanessa's polished tone, Mother's dismissive words. They played on repeat, not as wounds anymore, but as reminders. Every slight had built this. Every humiliation had become a tool in my hands. One evening, Nora called. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Are you okay?" I smiled to myself. "I'm fine, just working." "Working on what?" "Something I need to finish before the year ends." She hesitated. "Is it about them?" I looked out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, soft and cold. "No," I said. "It's about me." She didn't ask again, and I was grateful. The following weekend, I visited a community art center I once volunteered at. The walls were peeling, the lights flickering, but the place still breathed creativity. Children were painting on old easels, using colors too bright for the dull room. Their teacher, a woman named Ellen, smiled when she saw me. "Sarah, it's been years. What brings you back?" I told her I was organizing something: a charity event, a showcase, a chance for artists like hers to be seen. Her eyes softened. "That's beautiful," she said. "It sounds like something your father would have been proud of." Her words stopped me for a second. My father. I hadn't heard his name spoken kindly in years. I'd almost forgotten that he used to tell me, "Build something that matters, even if no one claps for it." That night I went home and dug through an old box in my closet. I found his sketchbook, the one he'd filled with half-finished designs before he died. On the first page, he'd written in pencil, "Creation is the quietest form of rebellion." I ran my fingers over the faded lines. That was when I knew this wasn't just an event anymore. It was reclamation. Every project I'd done before had been for survival. This one was for meaning. Weeks passed. The plan took shape. I secured a small art museum for the venue, convinced a few sponsors to donate supplies, and scheduled the event for the same night as Ethan's grand party. The timing wasn't revenge, not yet, but the symmetry was poetic. The exhaustion grew deeper, but it felt clean, honest. I'd work late into the night, the glow from my laptop painting shadows across my walls. There were moments I'd pause and just breathe, realizing I hadn't felt this alive in years. Sometimes, in the quiet, I'd hear my mother's voice echoing in my mind. You always think small, Sarah. She'd been wrong. I'd been careful. I'd been patient. I'd been building something she could never see. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed the work to exist. By the time the invitations were ready, they weren't printed on gold or embossed with titles. They were simple, black and white, carrying only a message: for those who create from the quiet. I mailed the first one to myself. When it arrived 3 days later, I held it like proof that I'd finally stepped out of the space they'd kept me in. As I pinned it to my wall, I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge doesn't always start with anger. Sometimes it begins with creation. She called it a peace offering. That's what she said when she texted me out of nowhere that morning. Let's grab coffee, Sarah. No tension, just peace. I stared at the message for a while before replying with a simple, sure. I already knew peace wasn't what she wanted. People like Vanessa don't come to apologize. They come to control the narrative. The cafe she picked was one of those new minimalist places downtown, all pale wood and soft jazz. She was already there when I walked in. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect lie, waiting behind a smile. Sarah, she said warmly, standing to hug me. Her perfume hit before her arms did. It's so good to see you. You look rested. Rested. That was the kind of word people used when they wanted to sound kind but couldn't find anything real to compliment. I sat down across from her. You look the same, I said quietly. She laughed softly, taking a sip of her latte. I wanted to clear the air after the whole party thing. I felt bad about how it might have looked. How it looked? I repeated. You mean posting about it publicly? Her tone stayed light. It was just an oversight. Honestly, Ethan and I assumed you were too busy with your design stuff. I could hear it, the careful pause before design stuff, that small hesitation where dismissal hides behind politeness. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream dissolve. You could have asked. Her eyes flicked up. You've been so distant lately. Ethan says he barely hears from you. That made me smile, but not kindly. He's been busy. Family events, big deals, classy nights. She didn't react. She just adjusted the sleeve of her silk blouse and leaned in, lowering her voice like we were sharing something important. Can I be honest with you? I nodded, though I already knew honesty wasn't what was coming. Ethan feels like you've pulled away because you're unhappy. And maybe that's true. He worries about you, Sarah. He says you never really achieved anything worth celebrating. And maybe that's why you avoid things like the party. You don't like feeling out of place. The words landed softly, like feathers covering a knife. I sat still, letting them cut. My first instinct was silence, and I stayed there. I could see she expected a reaction, a defense, a denial, something to prove she'd hit her mark. I looked her in the eye and smiled faintly. Did he really say that? She hesitated, but the damage was already done. He didn't mean it cruelly, she said quickly. He just worries you don't see your own potential. I took a slow sip of coffee. It tasted bitter, metallic almost. Tell him not to worry, I said. I'll give him something to talk about soon. Her brows lifted just slightly, but she recovered fast. That's wonderful, Sarah. I'm glad to hear you're working on something. You've always been creative. Creative. Another careful word. A safe label for something they didn't understand. I leaned back, watching her stir her untouched drink. You didn't come here to make peace, I said. You came here to make sure I stay quiet. Her mouth parted in protest, but I kept my tone calm. Don't worry, I'm not angry. I'm just done explaining myself to people who mistake silence for failure. She blinked. That was the first crack in her perfect composure. She forced a polite laugh. You've always had such a way with words. I guess I learned it from all the words people used to talk over me. Her phone buzzed. She checked the screen, relieved by the interruption. Well, she said, standing, this was good. Clearing the air, you know? I'll tell Ethan we talked. Do that, I said softly. Tell him I'm planning something special. She smiled, but there was something uneasy behind it now. Take care, Sarah. I watched her walk out, heels clicking, head high, like she hadn't just handed me confirmation of everything I already knew. When she was gone, I sat for a long while, staring out the window. The city outside looked the same as it always did. People moving fast, pretending they weren't chasing something that didn't want them back. I'd spent years chasing approval, thinking that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, they'd finally see me. But all they ever saw was what fit their reflection. I finished my coffee and checked my phone. A new email notification blinked at the top of the screen. The subject line read, Event Permit Approval, the Renewal Gala. I opened it, my pulse steady, calm. The permit had been accepted, the date confirmed. The same weekend as Ethan's grand party. The corner of my mouth lifted. Maybe Vanessa was right. I hadn't achieved anything worth celebrating in their world. But in mine, I just built something that would outlast their laughter. I locked my phone and whispered to myself, let them toast themselves. I'll be building something that matters. Outside, the winter wind caught the edge of my coat as I stepped into the street. The day felt sharper somehow, like the air itself understood what had just shifted. I didn't look back at the cafe. There was nothing left in there worth remembering. The first time I saw the article, I almost scrolled past it. It was on a local arts page, buried between restaurant reviews and community events. The headline read, Local Designer Hosts Charity Gala for Emerging Artists. For a second, I didn't realize it was about me. Then I saw the photo, one of my early designs from years ago, and the name printed beneath it, Sarah Upton. I stared at it longer than I meant to. The piece was small, written by a local reporter I'd met at a gallery years ago. She'd called it a quiet act of grace in a world obsessed with spectacle. That line stayed with me, quiet act of grace. I liked the sound of it. It didn't scream. It didn't need to. Within a day, the article started making rounds. A few small businesses I'd worked with shared it. Then a community page picked it up. By the end of the week, my inbox was full, local artists wanting to participate, volunteers offering time, even a few sponsors who remembered my name from projects I thought no one cared about. The invitations went out quietly, one by one. I designed them myself. Simple cream paper, soft gray lettering, no logos, no gold trim. They weren't meant to impress anyone. They were meant to invite the right people, the ones who saw meaning in something beyond appearance. My phone buzzed constantly that week. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were genuine, others curious. I answered all of them politely, keeping my tone even, never revealing how deep this meant to me. I didn't need to explain that this wasn't just an event. It was a mirror. Meanwhile, Ethan's posts filled my feed. Every day another update, another photo of him with sponsors, stylists, high-end brands. Grateful for all the support, he wrote under one caption, standing in front of a rented ballroom with Vanessa clinging to his arm. His comments were full of praise. Family, friends, even our mother, posting heart emojis like loyalty could be performed. I didn't comment. I just watched. Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing in a room full of noise. One evening, Nora came by to help with some finishing touches. She looked at the growing pile of envelopes and smiled. You realize this is turning into something huge, right? I shrugged. I didn't plan it to be huge. I just wanted it to matter. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. And it does. Everyone's talking about it. You're giving people a place to belong. That's rare. Her words hit deeper than she knew. Belonging had always been the one thing I never quite found. We spent the night sealing envelopes and labeling packages for delivery. It felt different from any project I'd done before. Slower, steadier, filled with purpose instead of pressure. Every name I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Later, when Nora left, I sat alone at my desk. My laptop screen glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the event layout I'd been working on. It wasn't grand. It was warm. Small tables, local art displays, quiet lighting. No photographers, no spotlight, just people who cared. My thoughts wandered to Ethan again. I remembered the first time I'd helped him plan a launch event years ago, before his company took off. I'd done everything: designed the banners, picked the decor, even called in favors to get him a caterer who'd just started her own business. Her name was Marcy. At the time, she'd thanked me like I'd saved her life. If this goes well, she'd said, I'll never forget what you did. She hadn't. We still kept in touch. When I reached out a few weeks ago, she didn't hesitate. Anything you need, Sarah. You're the reason I made it. She offered to cater the gala at cost, and I accepted. It felt right, like a small circle closing after years of running in one direction. The next day, as I was finalizing some delivery notes, Marcy called. Funny thing, she said, laughing softly. You won't believe this, but I just got another big order for the same weekend as your event. Oh? I said, curious but calm. That's great news. Yeah, she continued. It's from your brother. His company's throwing some big thing, and they wanted me to handle catering and decor. Said they'd heard good things about my work from someone in the family. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't bitter, just quiet, understanding laughter. Did you accept? Of course, she said. Business is business. But don't worry, I've got separate teams handling both. Yours comes first. Thank you, Marcy, I said softly. That's all I needed to hear. When I hung up, I sat for a long moment, the room completely still. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just a calm awareness of how things find their balance. He didn't even know it yet, but while he was busy building an image, I was building something with roots, something real. I looked around my workspace, sketches scattered, fabric samples pinned to the wall, the hum of quiet ambition filling the air. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like recovery. My phone buzzed again, another notification from social media. Ethan had posted another photo, this time of the ballroom setup, captioned, Perfection in Progress. I smiled faintly. The same florist I'd referred him to years ago stood in the background of his picture. It was all connected. Every bridge I'd built, every favor I'd given without recognition, every moment I'd been overlooked, it all circled back to this. As I closed my laptop for the night, I whispered under my breath, You wanted perfection, Ethan. I wanted peace. Let's see which lasts longer. The window beside me caught a faint reflection of my face, calm, focused, unafraid. And somewhere across town, my brother was unknowingly decorating his stage with the very pieces I once built for him to stand on. It started with a laugh. Not mine, of course. Ethan's. I saw it in a video clip someone sent me. Him at a pre-party dinner, raising a glass with that smug grin he'd perfected since college. Another Upton event? He joked. Well, I suppose charity is the last refuge for those who can't afford real success. The table laughed with him. Even Mother smiled politely. I watched it in silence. The sound turned down low, letting his words echo without noise. For a moment, I felt the old ache return, that dull pull in the chest that used to make me question my worth. But it didn't stay long this time. Maybe because I'd already learned that silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. I closed the video and went back to work, checking guest confirmations for the gala. By then, the preparations had taken on a rhythm of their own. Emails, phone calls, final checks with vendors. Everything that once felt exhausting now felt deliberate, focused. I wasn't competing with him, though anyone else might think so. I wasn't even trying to win. I just wanted to exist without apology. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the venue to review the final layout. The staff was setting up lighting, soft gold over white linens. The space looked calm, almost sacred. I walked through it quietly, trailing my fingers along the edge of one table. It reminded me of something my father used to say when I was young. Perfection isn't when you add more. It's when you finally stop needing to. I didn't need more. I just needed this to stand. Back home, I made tea and sat by the window as the sky turned gray. The local news played softly in the background, the kind of chatter you only half listen to until you hear your own name. The anchor's voice shifted. In Denver tonight, two major events are lighting up the city. On one side, Ethan Upton's annual year-end celebration for his firm, known for its high-profile guest list and luxury sponsors. And across town, his sister, designer and philanthropist Sarah Upton, hosts a charity gala supporting young artists. The words hung in the air. They'd said my name next to his, not beneath it. Equal footing, even if just for a breath. I didn't smile, but my hands trembled slightly on the teacup. I'd worked years for that one simple thing, to be seen without having to fight for space. My phone buzzed again. A message from Nora. "You're trending on local feeds. People love your story." I typed back, "Let them love the cause, not me." Still, I couldn't help glancing through the posts. Pictures of the venue setup, comments about the elegance and thought behind it. Words like humble, inspiring, refreshing. None of the things anyone had ever used for me before. But then another post caught my eye. Ethan again. A caption beneath a photo of him and Vanessa in formal wear. Biggest night of the year. Some try to imitate. We innovate. Subtle enough to pass as harmless. Sharp enough to slice if you knew where to look. For a second, I almost typed something back. Something measured, cutting, and true. But I didn't. I closed the app instead and leaned back in my chair. If he needed the world's attention to feel whole, let him have it. I'd learned that real validation doesn't come from being watched. It comes from finally not caring who's watching. As the evening stretched on, the wind began to rise outside. The sky darkened completely, clouds moving low over the city. I felt a strange calm wash over me, the kind that comes right before something begins. The phone rang once more, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Sarah Upton," I said. A woman's voice came through, cheerful and hurried. "Hi, this is Rachel from Channel 7. We're covering both events tonight, and I just wanted to confirm we're cleared to film short coverage at your gala?" I paused, then said softly, "Yes, you're welcome to. Just make sure the artists get the spotlight, not me." "Of course," she said. "It's an amazing story what you're doing." After she hung up, I sat there for a while in silence, the city lights flickering against my reflection in the glass. For years, I'd felt invisible in this same room. Now, even without moving, I felt seen. At 7:30, I got ready, nothing extravagant. A simple black dress I'd tailored myself, one I'd worn before to a smaller event where no one remembered I was there. Tonight, it felt different, though. Familiar fabric, new skin. I checked the clock. 7:52. 8 minutes to go. Across town, Ethan would be rehearsing his speech, practicing his smile in front of the mirror. Vanessa would be adjusting her necklace, making sure every camera angle flattered them both. I didn't need a speech. I didn't need a spotlight. I just needed the doors to open. I took a deep breath and reached for my bag. The faint hum of my phone vibrated again, a notification lighting up the screen. My name, trending. A photo from the gala already circulating with the caption, "Art, not ego." Outside, the rain began softly, tapping against the glass like applause from a distance. The moment the clock struck 8, I was no longer the forgotten one. And as I walked toward the door, a quiet thought rose in me, one I didn't try to push away this time. Do you think revenge can stay pure when it starts feeling right? The rain stopped just as the first guests began arriving. I stood near the entrance of the museum, greeting people as they stepped through the glass doors, their umbrellas folding like tired wings. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and perfume. It felt clean, honest. Nothing about this night needed to prove itself. The lights inside were soft, not blinding, glowing like candlelight over painted canvases and sculptures made from scrap metal and clay. Every piece had a story. Every artist had fought to be seen. Tonight wasn't about wealth. It was about worth. A man in a tailored gray suit approached, his wife holding his arm. Ms. Upton, he said, shaking my hand. This is remarkable. You've managed to make art feel human again. I smiled. That was the goal. He nodded, glancing around at the laughter and quiet conversation that filled the space. You didn't just host an event, he said. You built a sanctuary. His words stayed with me long after he walked away. A sanctuary. That was what I'd been craving my whole life. Somewhere I didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's frame. Across the room, a group of young artists stood in a loose circle, laughing and taking pictures in front of their work. One of them, a girl barely 20, came over with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. No one's ever displayed my paintings before. I touched her shoulder lightly. Then tonight, you belong here. I moved through the gallery slowly, listening, watching. Snippets of conversation floated by, compliments, curiosity, even awe. Words that had never belonged in my orbit now danced freely around me. Sarah Upton's eye for detail is stunning. Her grace reminds me of old Hollywood. She's changing how philanthropy looks. The live stream camera caught me for a moment, and the reporter's voice carried softly through the speakers. Here at the Denver Museum of Contemporary Arts, local designer and philanthropist Sarah Upton is hosting a groundbreaking charity gala. The event, dedicated to uplifting underrepresented artists, has already raised more than expected in its first hour. What's striking isn't its luxury, it's its sincerity. Sincerity. That word hit deeper than applause ever could. I stepped aside, letting the camera pan past me, capturing the glow of the art, the laughter of guests, the music that hummed like a heartbeat beneath it all. I didn't pose. I didn't perform. I just breathed. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was competing. I felt like I was becoming. My phone buzzed in my clutch, but I didn't reach for it yet. I stayed present, walking past tables lined with modest centerpieces made from hand-picked flowers. The volunteers I'd worked with all week were smiling, relaxed, proud. I could feel the energy of the room rising. Not frantic, not loud, but alive. A man approached me, holding a glass of sparkling water. Your brother's event looks different, he said gently, glancing at his phone. All lights and glitter. But this, he gestured around us. This has soul. I thanked him quietly and moved toward the corner where the pianist played, his hands gliding effortlessly over the keys. The melody wrapped the evening in warmth. Every note felt like a slow exhale, a quiet release of years I'd held inside. Another wave of guests enters, shaking off rain, smiling as they looked around. One of them, a woman from the Denver Times, caught my arm. Ms. Upton, congratulations, the city's watching. Your live stream already hit 50,000 viewers. 50,000. Not because of family name, not because of spectacle, but because people cared. I thanked her, keeping my tone measured, but inside something shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was undeniable. Finally, I reached for my phone. There were dozens of notifications, mentions, shares, articles already calling it. The night art took the spotlight from money. I scrolled slowly until one name stopped me. Vanessa's mother, missed call, then another, then a message. Have you seen this other gala? Sarah Upton's trending. I pictured her voice, sharp with disbelief, and Ethan's reaction. The tightening jaw, the hollow laugh, the way his pride would crack just enough to let the truth seep in. I imagined him standing in that golden hall he'd rented, surrounded by people who loved the idea of him, but never really knew him. Somewhere between speeches and champagne, he'd realized the one thing money couldn't buy, authenticity, was glowing quietly across town, carrying our name higher than his ever had. I locked my phone and set it down on the nearest table. The pianist began a new piece, soft and slow, and I listened to every note. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The city lights shimmered against the glass, like the world itself had decided to pause and watch. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it sink in. The weight, the freedom, the irony of it all. Ethan's lights might have been brighter, but mine reached hearts. I didn't plan it that way. Honestly, I didn't plan any of it. But life has a way of balancing what pride keeps uneven. Ethan's party was already in full swing by the time the accident happened. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew the pattern too well. The flashing lights, the crowd that dressed more for attention than celebration, and the sound of glasses clinking in rhythm with shallow laughter. He always liked his applause loud. I'd seen the live feed earlier, just out of curiosity. The ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, every inch screaming money. Vanessa stood beside him, polished and perfect, smiling that rehearsed smile. When the host called Ethan to the stage, the crowd turned, phones ready. That was his favorite moment. The spotlight, the silence before his voice filled it. Success, he began, lifting his champagne glass, isn't given. It's built, with vision, with discipline, with people who believe in you. He looked around like he owned the air they were breathing. I could almost predict every word. He'd say something about legacy next, something about family values and perseverance, as if he'd lived by either. And he did, until the staff member walked up to the stage. At first, no one noticed. The young man leaned close, whispered something in his ear. Ethan frowned, waved him off slightly, still talking. But the technician didn't move away. He said something again, firmer this time. That's when Ethan paused. Just for a second. The crowd stirred, curious. I imagined the room dimming just slightly as confusion replaced cheer. Then, behind him, the massive LED screen flickered. It wasn't supposed to. His company logo disappeared, replaced by a feed, mine, my gala. The first frame showed the museum bathed in gold light, guests laughing softly as live music played. The camera panned across art displays, catching the faces of young artists and volunteers. Then it focused on me. I stood at the podium, microphone in hand, my voice clear and calm. "Thank you," I said, "for believing in the ones who create in silence, who give beauty even when the world looks away. Tonight, we celebrate the forgotten artists and the forgotten daughters." The room fell dead quiet. My words echoed across his ballroom like a confession he didn't make. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. No one dared breathe. Vanessa turned her head toward the screen, confusion written across her face. Ethan just stared, frozen mid-step, his champagne glass still raised. A few guests gasped. One woman whispered, "Is that his sister?" Another murmured, "That's her event, isn't it?" The murmurs grew, filling the cracks in his silence. He finally lowered his glass, his jaw tightening, but his face stayed pale. I imagined his hands trembling, his mind racing through excuses. Maybe he thought it was sabotage. Maybe he thought it was intentional. But it wasn't. It was timing and truth finally catching up. The clip continued. The screen showed a wide shot of the audience at my gala, people standing to applaud, tears in their eyes. My voice softened through the feed. Art survives because it doesn't beg to be remembered. It simply refuses to be forgotten. Someone in Ethan's audience started clapping, hesitant, unsure which way the room was supposed to feel. Then it stopped, the sound swallowed by the tension thick enough to cut through velvet. He tried to speak again, but no words came out. His microphone stayed lowered, useless. The staff scrambled near the back to cut the feed, but every second that passed burned deeper into the silence. When the screen finally went black, the light seemed too bright, exposing every face. He cleared his throat, forced a laugh. "Well," he said weakly, "seems my sister knows how to make an entrance." A few people chuckled out of politeness, but the air had shifted. The glamour drained from the room, leaving only the weight of what had just been seen. Vanessa leaned in to whisper something, her eyes darting nervously across the crowd. He nodded stiffly, pretending it didn't matter, pretending control he no longer had. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated on the table beside me. Nora had texted, "They aired your clip at his party." I stared at it, letting the words sink in. I didn't reply. I didn't smile. I just sat still, listening to the soft hum of conversation around me at my own event, knowing that somewhere across the city, the truth had finally spoken for itself. I poured myself a glass of water, raised it slightly toward my reflection in the window, and whispered, "To the forgotten daughters." In the quiet that followed, I thought about him, not the businessman or the man who mocked my name, but the boy who used to share his crayons with me at the kitchen table. I wondered when ambition had turned him hollow. I didn't feel hate, just closure. He'd built a castle out of image, and all it took was one mirror to show him what it was made of. Somewhere between pride and silence, I found peace, because in his silence, I heard every apology he never made. He found me outside after the lights dimmed and the crowd began to scatter. The museum courtyard was quiet, washed in the soft glow of the fountain's reflection. I'd stayed behind to thank the last few guests, pretending not to feel the weight of his footsteps approaching. But I knew that sound, the rhythm of someone trying to hold on to dignity while it slipped through their hands. "Nice show," he said. His voice carried that forced calm he used when he wanted control. "You must be proud. Humiliating me in front of everyone. Was that your grand finale?" I didn't turn right away. I wanted him to hear how still my voice could stay. "It wasn't about you, Ethan." He laughed once, short and bitter. "Don't lie. You knew what that video would do. You used my event to make your little speech. You planned this." I looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were wild, but underneath the anger sat something smaller, fear. "I didn't plan anything," I said quietly, but I stopped hiding. That's what happens when silence starts to choke. He stepped closer. "You think this makes you better than me? You think people will forget who gave you everything?" "You didn't give me everything," I said. "You gave me the lesson." He frowned. "What lesson?" "How to disappear without leaving the room," I said. "You taught me everything I know about silence. I just gave it a voice." For a second, the air between us didn't move. His face softened, not out of guilt, but disbelief. "You've really turned into someone I don't recognize." "I finally did what you always told me to do," I replied. "I built something of my own. Only this time, it's real." He shook his head slowly, trying to hold his composure. "You made me look small tonight." I felt a cold kind of calm settle in my chest. "You did that to yourself." He exhaled hard, the kind of sound that comes from pride cracking. "You think the world's going to love you for this? Wait a few weeks. People move on, they always do." "Maybe," I said. "But for once, they saw me. That's more than you ever allowed." He stared at the ground for a long moment, his jaw tightening, then looked up with a strange mix of regret and rage. "I was trying to protect you, Sarah, from failing, from embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed. "You were protecting your reflection. You couldn't stand the thought of it showing a crack." His voice dropped lower, nearly a whisper. "You think this little charity makes you strong?" "No," I said softly. "Owning the truth does." He turned away, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to erase the night. "You should have stayed in your lane." "I outgrew it," I answered. "And you're still standing where you left me." He looked back at me once more, eyes full of something that almost resembled sorrow. "You've made enemies tonight. Don't act surprised when they turn on you." "Then I'll face them," I said. I faced worse. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fountain behind us kept its steady rhythm, the water catching the light in soft ripples. He stared at it like he wanted it to answer for me. Finally, he sighed. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending I hadn't." His hands went to his pockets. He nodded once, a silent surrender that wasn't peace, just fatigue. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." He hesitated, then turned and started walking toward the parking lot. His shoes echoed against the stone path, steady but heavy, the sound of a man dragging his pride behind him. I watched him go, my reflection flickering in the glass doors beside me. For years, I dreamed of him apologizing, of understanding the hurt he'd caused. But standing there, I realized I didn't need that anymore. His silence said more than words ever could. He didn't look back, and I didn't call out. When the sound of his car faded into the night, I walked back inside. The staff was clearing tables, laughter still lingering faintly in the air. My phone buzzed on the counter. Another notification. I glanced down just long enough to see a headline forming. Local Designers Gala redefines philanthropy. Sarah Upton's name makes front page. I exhaled slowly, setting the phone aside. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. He walked away that night, not knowing the papers already held my name. The morning light felt different, softer somehow. I woke up before the alarm, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm settling around me. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was more messages from Nora or the team, but it wasn't. It was everything else. News outlets, mentions, articles, each headline carrying the same name, mine. Designer Sarah Upton's gala raises record funds for young artists. From silence to spotlight, the woman who redefined charity. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the words. They didn't feel real. My name had always existed as an afterthought, usually in the shadow of my brother's. But this morning, it stood on its own, clean and unanchored. I made coffee, slow and deliberate, grounding myself in something ordinary. The house smelled like calm. Outside, the rain had stopped. A few rays of sunlight slipped through the blinds and fell across the table where yesterday's invitation still lay folded, a reminder of where I started and where I finally refused to stay. The newspaper arrived with a soft thud on the porch. I opened the door, barefoot, the cool air brushing against my skin. The front page was a full photo of the gala. Guests smiling beneath golden lights, artists standing proudly beside. Their work. My name printed in bold beneath the headline. I read it twice, tracing each letter as if it could disappear if I blinked too long. Inside, the article spoke about scholarships, opportunities, and the museum's plans to make it an annual event. But what caught me was one sentence near the end. Sarah Upton, the designer turned philanthropist, reminds us that success measured by empathy leaves no one behind. Empathy. The word felt heavier than success ever did. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. Hello? A pause, then her voice. Sarah? It had been weeks since I'd heard it. My mother's tone was strange, gentle but uncertain, as if she were choosing her words from a deck of emotions she'd never learned to play right. I saw the paper, she said finally. The photos, the stories. It was beautiful. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I didn't realize you'd done all that, she continued. I didn't realize how much you were capable of. I stirred my coffee slowly. You never asked. Silence stretched between us, long and familiar. She sighed. Your brother's in trouble. The investors are pulling out. That video, it made him look careless. That video was just truth, I said quietly. It's not my fault he never learned how to live without applause. Her breath hitched, faint but noticeable. He's hurting, Sarah. So was I said. For years. She didn't respond right away. I heard faint movement, maybe her pacing the kitchen, the same one where I'd once tried to show her my first sketches. She hadn't looked then either. I don't know when things changed, she said softly. Between you two, between us. You do, I replied. You just didn't want to admit it. Her voice lowered. You sound just like your father when you say that. I let out a small breath. That's probably the only thing I'm proud to have inherited. She went quiet again. I thought she might hang up. Instead, she said, I should have been there last night. You didn't have to be, I said. You've made your choices. I know, she whispered, but for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. The words landed awkwardly, fragile and unsure, but they were there. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle around us again. She spoke one last time, softer than before. You did good, Sarah. For the first time in a long time, she said my name without comparing it to his. After the call ended, I stayed seated for a while, the mug warm between my palms. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full, like something had finally returned to its rightful place. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and I thought about how strange it was that peace doesn't arrive with noise. It slips in quietly, like light through blinds. I picked up the newspaper again, folding it carefully. Not to save it for proof, but to remind myself that I didn't need permission anymore. The headlines would fade, the attention would move on. But the silence, the one I finally broke, would stay mine forever. She came without warning. No call, no message, just a soft knock against the glass door of my new studio. I looked up from the desk, startled, half thinking I'd imagined it. But there she was, standing outside in a beige coat that looked a little too heavy for spring. My mother. I opened the door, unsure what words could possibly fit between us. You found the place, I said quietly. I did, she replied. You always did have a good eye for corners no one expected to matter. Her voice had changed, softer, slower. Not from age, but from exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying things too long. Come in, I said. She stepped inside carefully, as if afraid she'd knock something fragile over. The studio smelled faintly of fresh paint and fabric dye. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching dust that moved like tiny ghosts in the air. She looked around, her eyes touching everything. The work table, the sketches pinned to the wall, the shelves of folded fabric. You did all this? I did, I said. She nodded slowly, almost to herself. It's beautiful. There was something trembling behind her words, something that felt like both pride and grief. I wasn't sure which was heavier. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by all the things I'd built in the silence she once told me to keep. Then she spoke again. You know, I used to dream of places like this, but I never thought you'd make one. I smiled faintly. You didn't think I could? She hesitated. I didn't think I'd given you enough to build from. That landed heavier than she probably meant it to. I leaned against the table, crossing my arms, trying not to let the years between us fill the room. You gave me more than you know, I said. You taught me how to survive being unseen. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. That's not what a mother wants to hear. It's what made me who I am, I replied. She walked closer, running her hand across a piece of fabric on the table, a soft gray silk I'd chosen for a new project. You used to love gray, she said. Your father said it was a sad color, but you told him it was peaceful. I remember, I said. He didn't listen. She smiled faintly. Neither did I. I wanted to tell her I'd forgiven her long before this day, but the words felt too light for something so deep. Forgiveness wasn't something I said. It was something I learned to live with. She turned toward the window, watching the street below. You were always stronger than I was, she said quietly. I just didn't know how to let you be. I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need echoing. She looked back at me. Your brother called me last night. He's trying to make sense of everything. I'm sure he is, I said. He'll come around, she added, though it sounded more like hope than certainty. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he won't. Either way, I've stopped waiting. She nodded again, her expression softening with something that looked like understanding. Not agreement, just the quiet acknowledgement that comes when denial finally runs out. We sat down at the small table near the window. I poured her tea. She held the cup in both hands, staring at the steam rising between us. When you were little, she said, you used to draw dresses on the backs of grocery receipts. I'd find them in the kitchen, taped to the fridge. I remember, I said. Ethan used to pull them down. Yes, she whispered. And I used to let him. Her voice trembled. I told myself it wasn't important, that you'd grow out of it. I looked at her for a long time. I didn't grow out of it. I grew into it. She set the cup down slowly, her fingers tightening around the handle before she let go. You did, she said. The quiet stretched again, but it didn't feel cold this time. It felt like breathing after years of holding it in. She glanced at the walls, at the light, at me. I missed a lot, she said softly. I nodded. So did I. There were no apologies. None were needed. We both knew what silence had cost. Birthdays, laughter, years of pretending everything was fine. Some debts can't be repaid, only recognized. When she stood to leave, she lingered at the doorway. Sarah, she said, her voice low, careful. You've built something beautiful. I hope you never let anyone make you feel small again. I met her eyes. I won't. She smiled faintly, the kind that hides more emotion than it shows. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled something out, and set it on the table beside the empty cup. Her wedding ring. I looked at it, then at her. That belonged to your grandmother, she said. Ethan always said it was family only. The light caught on the gold band as she stepped outside. I watched her walk down the street until she disappeared into the crowd. The ring sat quietly between us, even after she was gone, glinting in the sun like a truth that had finally found its way home. The light in my living room had shifted again, the way it always does when morning slides quietly into afternoon. It hit the wall where the old frame used to hang, the one with the crack running right through the middle. For years, I'd kept that picture up, even though it was broken. It showed the four of us at the lake, smiling like we believed in forever. Every time I passed it, that crack stared back at me, reminding me where things had split long before the glass ever did. Today, I took it down. The nail left a small dent in the wall, a pale outline where the frame had lived too long. I held the picture in my hands for a while, studying the edges, the faded smiles. My father's arm around my mother, Ethan's grin brighter than it had any right to be, and me, half turned, like even then I didn't belong. I placed it on the table and pulled out a new frame from the box beside me. Sleek, clean, untouched. I'd chosen it weeks ago, but hadn't known when I'd be ready to use it. I guess today was that day. From a folder on the shelf, I took out a glossy print, the photo from the gala, the moment caught in perfect stillness. Me standing under the soft golden lights, surrounded by the artists who'd believed in the cause, the scholarship recipients smiling beside me. I wasn't performing in that photo. I was present, whole. I slid it into the frame and fastened the back, hearing the tiny click that sealed it in place. For a second, I just stared at it, that one image replacing years of noise. When I hung it on the wall, the room felt lighter, like something had finally exhaled. Sometimes revenge isn't destroying what hurt you. It's outgrowing it so fully it loses its voice. That thought came to me softly, almost like a whisper, but it stayed. I sat down on the couch across from the wall and let the silence fill in what used to ache. I realized how strange it felt not to need an audience for peace. For so long, I'd imagined revenge as a sharp, burning thing. But now I knew it could be quiet. It could sound like laughter echoing from the next room, or the hum of a sewing machine late at night, or even the stillness of a home finally free from other people's expectations. The phone buzzed once on the coffee table. I ignored it at first. I didn't want the world intruding yet. But then it buzzed again, followed by the soft chime of an email notification. I reached for it reluctantly. One new message. No subject line, no greeting. Just a single attachment and 3 words typed below it. You won. The sender's name sat there like a ghost. Ethan. I stared at it for a long time before I opened the file. A scanned letter filled the screen. Official, impersonal, sealed by a courthouse stamp. Notice of bankruptcy. Filing. Ethan Upton. The document was clinical, stripped of emotion, the kind of paper that ends legacies quietly. For a while, I couldn't feel anything. Not triumph, not pity, just the faint hum of closure. He had built everything around appearance, deals, connections, approval. And when the surface cracked, there was nothing underneath to hold it up. I leaned back, letting the phone rest beside me. The frame on the wall caught the sunlight again, a soft shimmer crossing the glass. I thought about how different it looked from the old photo. No cracks, no forced smiles, just truth. Part of me wanted to call my mother, to tell her I'd seen the letter. But I didn't. She already knew. She'd always known this was coming. Silence was her way of accepting it. I picked up my sketchbook from the table and flipped to a blank page. Hand moved slowly, almost without thought, drawing lines that formed the outline of a new collection. Simple, steady designs, nothing loud, nothing desperate to be seen, just work that spoke for itself. The kind of work I used to dream of before I ever learned what failure felt like. When the sun began to dip, I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the lamp near the frame. The picture shimmered in the warm hue, and I caught my reflection faintly in the glass. I didn't look like the woman in the lake photo anymore, the one trying to fit inside someone else's version of family. I looked like me, the kind of woman who had learned that silence isn't weakness, it's recovery. I sat there for a few more minutes, tracing the air with my fingertip, the way I used to trace fabric patterns before cutting. The quiet felt earned this time. Then the phone buzzed one last time. A news alert this time. Ethan's company listed among major firms in financial collapse. The words blurred for a second, not from sadness, but from the strange weight of seeing a circle close. I set the phone face down, stood, and looked once more at the new frame. For the first time, the wall didn't feel like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like proof of what I'd built. The light dimmed, and I whispered to no one in particular, "Let it rest." And in that still room, it finally did. The banquet hall was almost unrecognizable. The same chandeliers that once burned bright for Ethan's galas now hung dim, their light weak and uneven. I pushed open the side door, the air still heavy with the faint scent of expensive perfume and disappointment. The carpet bore the marks of tables that had been dragged out in a hurry. I could still picture him there, standing at the center like a man born for applause. But there was no applause now, only silence. My heels made soft sounds as I walked farther in. Each step echoed in the hollow space, bouncing off the walls that once hosted his grand speeches. The banners were gone, the floral arrangements long wilted. The only thing left was the faint outline of where his stage lights used to hit the marble floor. I paused there for a moment, feeling the quiet press against my chest. They said his investors didn't show. They said his promises fell apart faster than the sound system that night. But I didn't need rumors to tell me that. I could feel it in the air, the residue of something that once demanded attention and now begged to be forgotten. I stood where the podium used to be, the one he'd used to look down at everyone while pretending it was admiration he deserved. I whispered softly to the empty room. His lights went out. Mine stayed on. The sound barely carried, but that was enough. I didn't need it to echo. It was just for me. For so many years, I thought I wanted him to see me win. I thought that was the point, to show him what he'd missed, what he'd underestimated. But standing there, surrounded by nothing but stillness, I realized it wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about finally seeing myself. I walked past the row of empty chairs, their cushions indented from people who probably pretended to care. I wondered if any of them thought about the lies they helped him build, or the way they clapped when he spoke about loyalty, while trading it away behind closed doors. I reached the back of the hall where the curtain still hung loose from its hooks. The fabric brushed against my shoulder as I passed. I remembered the night I stood in a different room under a different set of lights. My gala, not his. And how every applause felt earned, not borrowed. He used to say, "You'll never make it without the family name." I used to believe him. But family names only carry weight when the people behind them have integrity. When that collapses, all that's left is noise pretending to be legacy. I sat down for a moment on the edge of the stage steps, letting the quiet stretch. For once, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Peace isn't revenge. It's justice served quietly. That truth had taken me years to understand. Revenge burns fast. It devours the one who feeds it. But peace builds itself like a slow dawn, steady and irreversible. I looked toward the entrance, where sunlight spilled through the glass doors, cutting across the darkened hall. It touched the floor like a spotlight that had finally found the right person. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to step into it. I'd already been there. People used to tell me I was too quiet, too patient, too forgiving. But I've learned that silence has its own power. It listens longer than anger ever could. It endures. It transforms. I smiled faintly, thinking about how many times he told me I was naive. Maybe I was. Maybe believing in grace before vengeance is naive. But grace built everything vengeance tried to destroy. Before I left, I took one last look at the hall. The shadows had shifted again, falling across the empty tables where people once whispered about who mattered and who didn't. I didn't belong to that world anymore. If you've ever been underestimated, let this remind you. Silence has a way of speaking back. Like, subscribe, and share your story if you've ever found power in peace. I walked outside into the cool evening. The air smelled different out here, cleaner, unburdened. Across the street, I could see my own reflection faintly in the glass window of a cafe, soft light tracing the outline of a woman who had stopped chasing permission. That night, I realized my party didn't begin when his ended. It began the day I stopped needing an invitation.